It's always a special highlight, Sabbath afternoons, to have the concert and enjoy the music and the testimonies. And it's a blessing to know how music is a language. As his brother was sharing his life experience, every person has a story, quite a story. And I'm sure that when we all get to heaven by God's grace, it will be an endless testimonies of how did you get here, and how by God's grace were you saved. We're going to enjoy those testimonies there. This afternoon I would like to share with you upon a subject that is being once again agitated. It has to do with fundamentalism. And the title of my message this afternoon is a question: is fundamentalism a threat? Now let's start by, let's see if this is, I'm wondering where I have to point it at. Okay, I don't know exactly where I have to point it at to make sure it obeys. Thank you. Okay, thank you. As you can see, I'm not a tech-savvy person. Not to that extent. Thank you, Brother Chung. Okay. September 11, 2001 is a date that we will not forget. Even those of us who were not in the United States at that time, I was in South America. I remember clearly that morning when my late mother-in-law called me. She was living in Bogota, and she said, "Do you know what's happening?" I said, "No." "Well, look at the news. We lived in the country, we weren't connected. There wasn't internet that we had on the farm and things like that." And then we turned on the news and we saw what was happening. September 11, 2001, the United States suffered the worst terrorist attack on its very own soil. And since then, Islamic terrorism has continued to grow around the world, and it's considered nowadays a global threat. It's considered that way. Several things have happened just recently within the last 14 to 15 months. If you remember, towards November, December of 2015, the world was startled with the Paris attacks, and a lot of people were killed. It was the bloodiest attack in the Western world in years, one that the French president called an act of war on the night of November 13, when bombings and mass shootings erupted at several venues across Paris, and about 130 people were massacred that evening and that night. Then we had the San Bernardino, which was the next month on December 14, 2015, and that was here on our soil, United States, and 14 people were killed and 22 others were injured. And it seemed like one thing after another was happening. On March 2016, then we had the Brussels bombing at the airport in Belgium, and that was another tremendous thing that happened in a kind of a successive series of events. Then a couple more months went by, and then June 12, 2016, Orlando, Florida. And we remember that one as well, right? That night when 49 were killed, 53 people were injured. And all these were attacks that were in some way attributed or related to Islamic terrorism. Then the last one I want to mention is then in July 2016, a truck just rams into people when they were celebrating one of France's national days, and a lot of people died, just overrun by a truck and other aggressive activities that this driver, and he had pledged loyalty to ISIS, according to the reports that we received as well through the news. So yes, terrorism has been escalating and now is considered a global threat. In fact, it was a factor that played a significant role in the U.S. elections of last year. And even as of 2015, it was already playing a significant role. Now, the interesting thing, as I mentioned, these events that have happened and that have been escalating lately, is that Pope Francis has chosen to define Islamic terrorist groups as fundamentalists. That's the language he has chosen to use to identify them. In a press conference in December 2015, Pope Francis called fundamentalism a disease that exists in all religions. In the Catholic Church, and I'm quoting him, we have many who believe they possess, and listen carefully, absolute truth. We have many who believe, even within the Catholic Church, that they possess absolute truth, and they go on sullying others through slander and defamation, and this is wrong. I say this because it is my church. Religious fundamentalism must be combated. It is not religious. God is lacking. It is idolatrous. End of quote. Then the view you have there on the slide, this was on July 31st, 2016, as he was flying back from Krakow, Poland to Rome, and he had a press conference there, or he was interviewed by reporters on the airplane, and he had this to say of many things that he shared there. I believe that in pretty much every religion there is always a small group of fundamentalists. Fundamentalists, we have them. When fundamentalism comes to kill, it can kill with the language. The Apostle James says this, not me, and even with a knife. No, I do not believe it is right to identify Islam with violence. He identifies the violence with fundamentalists. Now, fundamentalism is an interesting term. It's interesting to note when you do a little bit of research that the traditional definition of fundamentalism has been used to describe or to label conservative religious groups or movements, especially those characterized by the advocacy of strict conformity to sacred texts. Now, it used to refer exclusively to American Protestants who insisted in the inerrancy of the Holy Scriptures. That's how it was used originally, that term, to describe American Protestants who believed and insisted in the inerrancy of the Holy Scriptures. So just think about that and the usage of that term nowadays and how it's being associated with violent terrorist, Islamic terrorists. That labeling of it. Now, several years ago, many years ago now, 1992, the Catholic Church had a big celebration. It took place in Dominican Republic. It was celebrating the 500 years of the evangelization of the Americas, or the discovery, but this is the term that was used. October 12, 1992, 500 years from the date that Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas. So the Latin American Episcopal Council, known as the CELAM, it is a council of Roman Catholic bishops of Latin America, which was created in 1955 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. They gathered in Dominican Republic to celebrate the 500th anniversary of the evangelization of the Americas. And they gave a definition during that conference, that council, of what fundamentalist sects are. And just read what it says there. I'm going to read it from my slide here as well. religious groups that insist that salvation only comes through faith in Christ, and that the only foundation for faith is the Holy Scriptures, interpreted in a personal and fundamentalist way, therefore excluding the church or the clergy, and who insist in the imminent end of the world and a coming judgment. Now, do you somehow identify yourself with that definition of a fundamentalist? Now, if you identify yourself with that definition, do you feel comfortable that fundamentalists are being defined as terrorists? Do you feel comfortable with that labeling at this time? So, yes, that is the situation that we are living in. So my next question is Adventism being identified with fundamentalism? We see the connection, but is it being done out there as well? A lot of attention was brought towards the Adventist Church in 2015 and 2016 with Dr. Ben Carson running for office. And Newsweek reported on September 30, 2015, that as Carson rises in the polls as he seeks the Republican presidential nomination, this has spurred interest in the church that has shaped so much of his life. If he continues to gain momentum, Americans are bound to have questions about Seventh-day Adventists, just as they did about Mitt Romney's Mormon faith, and at another time, John F. Kennedy's Catholicism. So the article goes on to explore and speak about the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I'm sure many of you read different articles that came out on the Washington Post, on CNN, on Times Magazine, and so forth, speaking about Seventh-day Adventism. We were on the forefront for a while. So it says, the Seventh-day Adventist movement emerged contemporaneously with evangelical groups during the Great Second Awakening, an American religious revival in the first half of the 19th century. Many of these movements subscribe to millennialism, the belief in an imminent second coming of Christ, which would signal the end of the world. Does that sound like fundamentalism? Yeah. It goes on to say in the very same article, David Hartland, a professor who teaches the history of many Christian denominations at Harvard Divinity School, he affirms that some scholars view Adventism, and Ellen G. White in particular, as an early source for the rise of creationism and fundamentalism in America. So yes, and that was part of that article that had the picture of Dr. Ben Carson at the beginning, and as you read through the whole thing, he is actually mentioning that by authorities at Harvard that there are scholars who believe that Adventism is a fundamentalist religious group. Now, do we agree with that? Yes and no, right? We agree with that when you look at the theological definition of fundamentalism. Believe in the inerrancy of the Bible. Believe in the second coming of Christ. There is a judgment. The end of the world is imminent. We believe that Scripture can be interpreted in a personal way with the aid of the Holy Spirit. It doesn't have to be interpreted through the clergy, right? We believe in that? Do we believe that fundamentalists are violent? Do we appreciate the fact that fundamentalism is being associated with Islamic terrorists? No. But what can we do about that? You know, it's happening. It's happening. Should we just shrug our shoulders and say, well, what can we do? Or do we have a responsibility, something to play as we see this scenario developing around us and growing? Yes, there is an existing prejudice against those who hold the Bible as an absolute source of truth. This is real, and it will continue to grow. And one of the reasons why it will continue to grow and it will target Seventh-day Adventists is because the Seventh-day Sabbath is a literal application, not only that's linked with creationism, which is another one of the aspects that is linked to fundamentalism, as you saw there, but because the world will accept a day of rest. But they will accept a day of rest that's defined by the clergy, not by just a simple, literal reading of Scripture, which is once again fundamentalism. Now it's interesting to see this connection because, when you speak about Islam, they say that they're moderate Muslims, and that's not the theme of my message this afternoon. But it is those who believe in a strict adherence to the Quran, the ones who become violent. Therefore, those who believe in a strict adherence to the Bible or any other sacred text, they are also fundamentalists, and they will commit the very same acts of violence given time and circumstances. That is kind of how the equation plays out. Now, how do you think people will buy into this idea? And in our current society, where people are so anxious to just jump on board with whatever is emotional and feeds into their fears, and the end justifies the means. Yeah, these are the times in which we are living. Testimonies, Volume 6, Testimonies to the Church, page 394. There will come a time when, because of our advocacy of Bible truth, we shall be treated as traitors. There will come a time. Because of what? Because of our advocacy of Bible truth. Now, the scenario is being set. The mindset is being developed. It's just a matter of when the Lord allows those winds of strife to be set free. And that will be the scenario that we will be facing. It's a scenario that some are experiencing under a different context. I was reading yesterday afternoon because I have an app on my phone that just pops up news. So I happened to see something that said that 2 immigrants were coming from Iraq, and yesterday when they got to the airport, they were stopped because the president's decree already went out of halting, pausing the immigration of people coming from specific countries that pose a threat because of terrorism going on in those countries, and that they were detained at this airport. And I just read a little bit of that about that, but I thought, what an unpleasant experience if we were having to go through that. You fly in and you get to an airport, and I have experienced things like that. I once flew into Puerto Rico, and when I got there, they had these dogs and all these things, and I was coming on a flight from Colombia, and Colombia is famous, or has been famous in the past for what? Oh yeah, you all got it right. So yes, they singled me, and they wanted to do x-rays and take off all of my clothes and do all these extra things, and it's not a pleasant experience. It's not a pleasant experience to have to go through those things and to fear that you might not have rights because of certain circumstances. But the Bible says that will become a universal thing for those who hold the Bible as an absolute source of truth, and it will happen in the near future. Great Controversy, page 614, and we are familiar with this quote. Yes. Those who honor, I'm going to start with the previous paragraph. Those who honor the law of God have been accused of bringing judgments upon the world, and they will be regarded as the cause of the fearful convulsions of nature and the strife and bloodshed among men that are filling the earth with woe. We only read this and we can just try to imagine how it will be, but prophecy has revealed it ahead of time to us that will happen, that those who honor the law of God will be accused of bringing judgments upon the world. The power attending the last warning has enraged the wicked. Their anger is kindled against all who have received the message, and Satan will excite to still greater intensity the spirit of hatred and persecution. What will Satan do? He will incite it to even greater depths and lengths, that spirit of hatred and persecution. And the Sabbath will become the special point of controversy throughout Christendom. And towards the end of that paragraph we read, Romanism in the Old World and apostate Protestantism in the New World will pursue a similar course toward those who honor all the divine precepts. So it's not going to be against those who keep some of God's precepts, but against those who regard all of God's precepts. Once again, it's fitting that category of fundamentalists, those who just claim the whole Scriptures as being inerrant. Testimonies to Ministers, page 37, we read, the whole world is to be stirred with enmity against Seventh-day Adventists because they will not yield homage to the papacy by honoring Sunday, the institution of this anti-Christian power. Now, as we see this scenario, we know prophetically that it will come, right? We believe that. It is interesting that these truths are not popular, and we have to be aware of that fact, even as we're seeing developments in our world that are moving events in that direction. But the great controversy has, and the spirit of prophecy and the Bible have clear counsel for us as to what to do as we see this happening. Great controversy, the chapter The Time of Trouble, uses a special illustration taken from the Bible, which is the illustration of Jacob and Esau. Let's take a look at that. Jacob's company, unarmed and defenseless, seemed about to fall helpless, victims of violence and slaughter. And to the burden of anxiety and fear was added the crushing weight of self-reproach. For it was his own sin that had brought this danger. His only hope was in the mercy of God. His only defense must be prayer. Yet, he leaves nothing undone on his own part to atone for the wrong to his brother and to avert the threatened danger. So Jacob, he was in prayer, he was in agony, he was asking God for mercy, and he was also doing something else, even though he relied 100% on God's mercy. And what was that? He leaves nothing undone on his own part to atone for the wrong to his brother and to avert the threatened danger. And then it says, likewise, or so, should the followers of Christ, as they approach the time of trouble, make every exertion to place themselves in a proper light before the people, to disarm prejudice and to avert the danger which threatens liberty of conscience. That's in Great Controversy, the chapter, The Time of Trouble. So what was it that Jacob did to try to avert danger coming from his brother Esau? What was it that he did? Well, let's turn to Genesis chapter 32 and read a few Bible passages. Genesis chapter 32, and we read from verse 1 and onwards. And Jacob went on his way. He is leaving from Laban's house and going back to his fatherland. And angels of God met with him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's host." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to who? To Esau, his brother, into the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, "Thus shall ye speak unto my lord Esau. Thy servant Jacob saith this, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now. And I have oxen and asses, and flocks, and men servants, and women servants. And I have sent to tell my Lord, that I may find grace in thy sight. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee. And he cometh with 400 men with him. Well, that was an act of war, wasn't it? He was coming to mean business. And the last time that Jacob had interacted with Esau, what had Esau promised to do? Kill him, and that's why he fled. And now it was not just Esau. He had 400 men with him. Then we read, verse 7, Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that was with him, and the flocks and herds and the camels into 2 bands. And he said, If Esau come to the one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord which said unto me, Return unto thy country and unto thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee. I am not worthy of the least of thy mercies, and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become 2 bands. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, the hand of Esau. For I fear him, lest he come and smite me, and the mother with the children. Now, as you continue reading through the chapter, you will see, we review, that he started sending presents to Esau. And it says in verse 13, And he lodged there that same night, and took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother, 200 she-goats, and 20 he-goats, and 200 ewes, and 20 rams, and 30 milch camels with their colts, 40 kine, and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses, and 10 foals. And he delivered them unto the hand of servants. Every drove by themselves, and said unto his servants, Pass over before me, and put a space betwixt drove and drove. And he commanded the foremost, saying, When Esau my brother meeteth thee, and asketh thee, saying, Whose art thou? And whither goest thou? And whose are these before thee? Then thou shalt say, They be thy servant Jacob's. It is a present sent unto my lord Esau. And behold, also he is behind us. Now, have you ever thought why the spirit of prophecy takes this incident of Jacob with his brother Esau and says, likewise or similarly, we should try to do in order to avert the danger of the threat of religious liberty and the danger and to disarm prejudice? How would we apply that today? I believe that this is a relevant message because the spirit of prophecy says, as they see approach the time of trouble. It doesn't say when the time of trouble hits them, as they see it approach. And we are seeing how the enemy is already creating an environment and a label with fundamentalism against those who believe the Bible truth, the absolute Bible truths. So don't you think that now would be a time to start to do what Jacob did with Esau? Do you think so? How should we do that?
What the spirit of prophecy says, move to the country.
Go to the country. Now, I'll get into that a little bit later, but many times we think of self-preservation. But Jacob, if we want to call it self-preservation, his main concern was his spiritual condition. And secondly, he wanted to disarm Esau's prejudice. What was Esau's prejudice? Well, let's go back. What had Jacob taken away from Esau? His birthright. So in sending him gifts, what was Jacob telling Esau? I'm not going to take away the birthright from you. I have things. I'm willing to give you things. I'm not going to take that away from you. So he was disarming the negative thoughts, impressions, and even realities of Esau against Jacob, because Jacob had failed Esau. So he was meeting Esau in that very same terrain. He was disconstructing those preconceived ideas that Esau had about Jacob. Years ago, Jacob had deceived him. He had stolen from him the birthright. He wanted to make sure that Esau saw that that was not right. So now bringing it to our time, fundamentalists are being associated with dangerous people who are violent, who are terrorists. If we just go and hide in the mountains, are we going to change that perception? So there has to be something else. There has to be something else where we actually start interacting with those who think that we are violent and showing them that we are not violent, that we are there because we love them. And the gospel truths that we find in the Bible will bring them peace, salvation, solutions to the problems that they're experiencing. We have to take the lessons from the experience of Jacob and from this biblical illustration. Counsels to Writers and Editors, page 64. There is to be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation. Our work is to weed out of all our discourses everything that savors of retaliation and defiance, and making a drive against churches and individuals, because this is not Christ's way and method. Is there something we can do? Counsels to Writers, page 64. Continue reading from that book. Let everyone bear in mind that we are in no case to invite persecution. We are not to use harsh and cutting words. Keep them out of every article written. Drop them out of every address given. Let the word of God do the cutting, rebuking. Let finite men hide and abide in Jesus Christ. Let the Spirit of Christ appear. Let all be guarded in their words, lest they place those not of our faith in deadly opposition to us, and give Satan an opportunity to use the unadvised words to hedge up our way. What type of words? Unadvised words that would hedge up our way. Now remember the exact words that we read Pope Francis having said when he was on the airplane. He said, I believe that in pretty much every religion there is always a small group of fundamentalists. Fundamentalists, we have them. When fundamentalism comes to kill, it can kill with what? With the language. And then he quotes the Apostle James. And he says, the Apostle James says this. I'm not saying it. It's the Apostle James. And even with a knife, no. So let's turn to James chapter 3, verse 8. He might have been referring to this biblical text. I went to James after I read that, and we all know that James has a chapter where he speaks about the tongue, which is referring to words. And there is a text actually there that refers to words that can kill, not in those exact same words, but you will see and understand. Verse 8 of James chapter 3, but the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Full of deadly poison. Now we know, and we read in Daniel chapter 11, that tidings from the east will enrage the king of the north. And we believe that in that prophetic language is referring to the three angels' messages. And part of the three angels' messages is a warning against receiving the mark of the beast. That is the third angel's message. And hearing that message is going to cause the king of the north to be very upset. Very upset. We understand that. So knowing that prophecy announces that, it's very interesting to see the context of those who with their words can kill. And we know that nowadays there are attempts to curtail freedom of speech when you're speaking bad about other religions. Right? We understand that those things have been discussed. How can we deal with those things when at the same time we have the command of sharing the three angels' messages? How can we reconcile those things together? Well, I thank the Lord for the spirit of prophecy and for Christ's example in Scripture. The very same book, Counsels to Writers and Editors, page 64, paragraph 3, we read, "Brethren, I feel hurt when I see that so many decided thrusts are made against the Catholics. Preach the truth, but restrain the words which show a harsh spirit, for such words cannot help or enlighten anyone." Many times we forget as we are presenting the three angels' message that we are not to present it in such a way where it comes across as harsh words against the Catholics. Not so long ago, I was included in a small chat group. I did not ask to be part of it, but they added me to it. And it was a group of Seventh-day Adventists naturally. And a lot of things were being discussed in that group. I would take a look and see what was going on. Did not participate until one of the participants in that group began making thrusts against Elder Ted Wilson and making very clear accusations that I knew were not true. Even making statements and misconstruing things of circumstances and speeches that he had held where I myself was present. So I just felt a responsibility. This is slander. It's not correct. I was there. I should make a statement. So I did that. Got myself into trouble. I was no longer popular in that chat, but I tried to set the record straight because it was slander. And one of the things that came up was had to do with a similar message that is on YouTube, which is called, it says, Ted Wilson, a saint or a serpent or a snake. Perhaps some of you have seen it. Ted Wilson, a snake or a saint. And I'm not encouraging you to watch it, but I watched the first 30 minutes, and it was very similar to the discussion that was going on in this chat. And one specific argument that was being used against Elder Ted Wilson was because in Grand Rapids, at the ASI meeting that took place there, I think it was in 2014, Grand Rapids. Yeah, I think it was the first time that we were there with the booth, and 2014 was the year where we made significant, substantial changes, so I think it was 2014. But we were there, and there was a roundtable discussion where Elder Wilson was there and other church leaders, and they were asking them questions about the three angels' messages and about the mark of the beast and things like that. Now, when they asked Elder Wilson, he gave an answer to one of the questions about the mark of the beast, and he said, when any human entity or authority exalts another day of the week as God's sacred day, that is not the seventh day, that is imposing human authority above God's authority. I'm not quoting him verbatim. I am paraphrasing the content. But the bottom line is that Elder Wilson never said the word Sunday. He just said, when another day that isn't the seventh day. And because he chose, or for some reason did not say the word Sunday, then they said, you see, he's not preaching the three angels' messages. He's not. Just because of that. Now, I thought in my mind, what would they have done? Did you understand the point? Okay. I thought in my mind, what would have happened if they had lived, those who are accusing Elder Wilson of this, if they had lived in the days of the Apostle Paul? Because the Apostle Paul in Thessalonians wrote to the Thessalonian church and said, Christ's coming is not yet, because the man of sin has to come first. But you know who is holding him. Because when I was there, I told you. Come on, say it, say it. Why don't you say it? You get the point? Come on, say it. It's the Roman Empire. Say it. Well, Paul didn't say it. He just said, when I was there, I told you. So bring it to our context. Any other day except the seventh day, well, why don't you say it Sunday? Oh, you're denying the three angels' messages. Same rationale. They would have rejected the Apostle Paul, who's in the Bible. Now, what about Jesus? What did Jesus do with the Roman Empire in his days? Actually, he said, if the Romans ask you to carry a burden 1 mile, what should you do? Carry it a second mile. Carry it a second mile. And people were like, what's going on with Jesus? If he's the Messiah, he should be destroying the Romans, not serving them. Not serving them. So, let's bring it to our context. Counsels to the Church, page 317, we read, the time will come when unguarded expressions of a denunciatory character that have been carelessly spoken or written by our brethren will be used by our enemies to condemn us. The time will come. These will not be used merely to condemn those who made the statements, but will be charged upon the whole body of Adventists. Our accusers will say that on such and such day, one of our responsible men said thus and so against the administration of the laws of this government. Many will be astonished to see how many things have been cherished and remembered that will give point to the arguments of our adversaries. Many will be surprised to hear their own words strained into a meaning that they did not intend them to have. Then let our workers be careful to speak guardedly at all times and under all circumstances. Let all beware, lest by reckless expressions they bring on a time of trouble before the great crisis, which is to try men's souls. Interesting, right? And I had the burden to share this because I have seen many times how we fall into this. Instead of presenting the third angel's message as God would have us present it in an objective, loving way, we go overbound and we just a tirade against governments, officers, and people who represent these systems portrayed in prophecy in a reckless way. And we do it with zeal, good intentions, but it's not wisdom. Matthew chapter 10, verses 16 through 18 says, let's turn to Matthew chapter 10. And Jesus is speaking here and giving his disciples counsel. Matthew chapter 10. Verse 16 through 18, behold, I sent you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to the councils, and they will scourge you in their synagogues, and ye shall be brought before governors and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them and the Gentiles. Be ye wise as serpents and harmless as doves. God has given us that counsel. It was Jesus himself who spoke these words to us. Moving on in time, we read, referring to when the time of trouble is actually here, the Sunday law. And this quote is from Counsels to the Church, page 318. Let the teachers in our schools devote Sunday to missionary effort. I was instructed that they would thus be able to defeat the purposes of the enemy. Let the teachers take the students with them to hold meetings for those who know not the truth. Thus they will accomplish much more than they could in any other way. When the Sunday law was being agitated back in towards the end of the 19th century, there were those among the Seventh-day Adventist faithful leaders who thought that refraining from work on Sunday when these blue laws were being enacted was accepting the mark of the beast. And Sister White had to speak clearly against this. I believe that even A.T. Jones at one time was one of those who was advocating this position. Work on Sunday, because if you don't, you're accepting the mark of the beast. And the Lord had to give instruction through His prophet, through His messenger. This is not correct. Do not invite persecution. The people must be given the truth, straightforward, positive truth. But this truth is to be presented in the Spirit of Christ. We are to be as sheep in the midst of wolves, those who will not, for Christ's sake, observe the cautions that He has given, who will not exercise patience and self-control, will lose precious opportunities of working for the Master. The Lord has not given His people the work of making a tirade against those who are transgressing His law. In no case are we to make a raid on the other churches. So we have to be very careful in the way we present our prophetic message, which is true and is objective, but we must do it in love and avoiding harsh language. We are to do all we can to remove the prejudice that exists in the minds of many against our work and against the Bible Sabbath. Now, when you look at the biblical examples that are used in the book of Revelation to refer to the time of trouble, it's amazing because, once again, the time of trouble, of Jacob's trouble, and we have the illustration of Jacob's dealing with Esau, trying to reach Esau's heart. It says in the next chapter, Genesis chapter 33, that when he finally met Esau, Esau embraced him. Now we know that in the final scenario, that's not what's going to happen. But our intention should be as to achieve that result. If that's the biblical illustration, then it makes sense. Another biblical illustration that we find is Esther. In the days of Esther, there was a decree, a death decree against all the people of God. And Esther was there. When Mordecai heard of the death decree, and that's the whole story, Mordecai encouraged Esther to approach the king. And Esther was afraid because she was not supposed to approach the king unless he had invited her to come into his presence. And Mordecai says, "Think it not because you're the queen you will be spared, but for such a time as this, God has placed you in that position." And what was Esther's attitude once she had that conviction? She went out of her way. It says in Esther, I believe it's chapter 5, she dressed in her best queenly apparel, royal apparel, and came to his presence. When the king saw Esther dressed as she was, of course the Holy Spirit impressed his heart, and he accepted her. And what was the invitation that Esther had for the king? A meal. He invited him to a meal. And then they had the meal together, and then the king says, "What is your request, O Esther, O queen?" "I have another meal invitation for you." Now, and eventually she shares what's upon her heart. And this high officer in government, the highest one in government, the emperor, even though the law of the Medes and the Persians did not allow for a law to be changed, he still did as much as he could to what? To favor them. Now, many times we overlook these aspects of Bible stories that are used to illustrate the end of the world. Now, where are the Esthers today trying to connect with the kings of this world and create some bonds of even affection, so that they can present to them what is the real message and what is the real controversy? Many times we try to avoid people in government because, those are the bad guys who are going to persecute us. Don't we have that approach many times? We need to have a different approach. The Lord has been trying to do a work in my own life because I am a third generation Seventh-day Adventist. And since I've been 8 years of age, and now I'm almost, I was born in 1969, so I'll let you do the math. But since I turned 8 years of age, I've lived in the country, Sister Gloria. And I've lived in the country in areas where you could only arrive walking or on donkeys. No electricity, no running water, and I lived without any electricity for more than 13 years, deep in the country. So I know I've experienced that. I've gone to places where people bought farms that had caves so they would be prepared for the persecution and all those things. As I became an adult, there was something negative to that experience, and it's that I did not learn how to relate with Gentiles, with Catholics. I did not learn. I only learned in that process to relate with like-minded people. So God in His providence gave me a wife who comes from a Catholic background. Her mom was Catholic. And I was sure that because of providential circumstances that God wanted me to marry her. But after I got married to her, I would ask God, okay, I know you gave me my wife, but why did you give me a Catholic mother-in-law? Now that doesn't fit in the grand design, the perfect pattern. My mother-in-law needed to be a fourth generation Seventh-day Adventist, vegan from birth, living in the country, and all the old 9 yards. But it didn't fit the right description. So I stumbled through that process of communication, and I would tell the Lord, why did you give me a Catholic mother? To learn to love and minister to the Catholics. I appreciated when Pastor Hartland said, he himself was a Catholic, and that there are so many good people there. Just last year, the ministry that by God's grace I helped found in Colombia and that I left 6 years ago with my wife, they have been able to reach the Catholic authorities because the current mayor of the city of Armenia is a Catholic priest. And it was such a blessing to see the ministry there, from the director of the ministry, the current director, to the staff and students there in the governor's office with his cabinet members, serving them. Dr. Payan is here. He was one of the persons. I think he had the opportunity to give the trust in God interaction with the Catholic priest who is the mayor of the city of Armenia. Make friends with the Catholics who are in high power. They're not our enemies. Who is the enemy? Satan, the adversary. Everyone else is a candidate for the kingdom of heaven. And we should be disarming prejudice instead of planting prejudice at this time. That is the counsel that God, the Spirit of prophecy, is giving to us. Fundamentalism is a threat that we can turn around if we use it to glorify the Lord. I want to read a couple thoughts as I am closing this message. In every age since Christ was among men, okay, I actually have a slide for this, so might as well use it. This is from Selected Messages, Volume 2, page 318. There were some who had capabilities to help the church, but who needed first to set their own hearts in order. Some had been bringing in false tests and had made their own ideas and notions a criterion, magnifying matters of little importance into tests of Christian fellowship, and binding heavy burdens upon others. Thus a spirit of criticism, fault-finding, and dissension had come in, which had been a great injury to the church. And the impression was given to unbelievers that Sabbath-keeping Adventists were a set of fanatics, extremists, and their peculiar faith rendered them unkind, uncourteous, and really unchristian in character. Thus, the course of a few extremists prevented the influence of the truth from reaching the people. I'll let you digest that one. Just let it sink in. How many times we create man-made tests of fellowship, which the Lord has not laid those burdens upon us. How many times? Now, as I was growing up, I learned the blessing that 2 meals are better than 3. Right? I hear kind of a mixed response. 2 meals are better than 3 if that is your choice. But if that's what's imposed upon you, then 4 meals are better than 2. I went to visit a place, and the spiritual leader of this outpost center, way in the country, he said the counsel is 2 meals are better than 3. So I'm going to help this actually happen. So he went to the homes, the homes of the staff on campus, and he knocked down, literally, the stoves, the kitchens from every home. Now, that was easy to do because it was in the country, so the stoves were not inside insulated houses. The stoves were outside, like some third world countries. It was a wooden stove outside in a shack because the furnace would make a mess of the house. So it was easy to go there and knock down these stoves, these altars down. The purpose was to help them have only 2 meals a day. Talk about making something a test of fellowship that God has never made. And the list could go on. Man-made burdens that God has not intended make Sabbath keepers look like a bunch of fanatics. And who wins with all that? Satan. Because he brings reproach upon the true gospel message. And we have to beware because when you're speaking to a liberal crowd, Satan will work with them in a different way. But how does Satan work with those of us who would like to consider ourselves conservative? Then he trips us with these type of things and misrepresenting Christ with these situations. This is a beautiful quote, and it's my last slide. Those with whom God has entrusted His truth must so order their intercourse with the world as to secure to themselves a calm, hallowed peace, as well as a sacred and most thorough knowledge of how to meet men with what? With their prejudices, where they are, and minister to them the light, comfort, and peace found in the acceptance of the truth of God. They should take, for example, the inspiring, authoritative, and social life of Christ. They must cultivate the same beneficent spirit which He possessed, and must cherish the same broad plans of action in meeting men where they are. I pray that as we see the threats and the imminent storm coming upon us, we may ask God for wisdom to disarm prejudice, to present the beauty of the 3 angels' messages as Christ would have us do. Christ Object Lesson says in page 415, the last rays of merciful light, the last message of mercy to be given to the world, is a revelation of His character of love. The children of God are to manifest His glory in their own life and character, and they are to reveal what the grace of God has done for them. This is my prayer, that we might be able to apply these lessons today.